Well, gentlemen, we're here to hear the story of Charlie. And this is a bit of a funny way to do it because, we're very jovial. We're having a great time. But Charlie, of the three of us, you're probably the newest and the most recent to investigating the faith, being the Catholic faith. And so you agreed. Chris thought it was a great idea, and I thought it was a great idea to hear why you became interested in Catholicism, and where that inquiry has led you today. And Chris and I are just going to sit back and poke and throw little jibes at you along the way to make it entertaining. So can I start by asking, were you born Catholic?
I was not. No, I was born into a agnostic/atheist socialist household, if you could believe it. My mum was a single parent. She raised me, I'd say, fantastically well, because she let me discover my own ideas, first and foremost. She let me play around in the world and just come to some conclusions that were quite zany to begin with, but I like to say I've reeled in recently. But so yes, I wasn't born a Catholic. I had no inclination towards it, and I've undertaken this journey from scratch very recently.
Any brothers and sisters, Charlie?
I'm an only child as well, so no brothers and sisters either. So that's it. Yeah, single parent household. Just me.
just Charlie, Lord Fauntleroy. Is he in England? He was an English lord, wasn't he? Lord Fauntleroy.
If he's not, he should be.
That's a fantastic name.
Let's keep poking. Family history, are you familiar? Was there religion in the family heritage at all? I imagine you're English, so there would have been something somewhere.
It's a great question. I'm going to say with an emphatic yes. I shall tell a funny anecdote for this one. Funny on a certain perspective, but my ancestors in the 19th century, were very big into revivalism on the when it was in full swing, and when they were quite wealthy back then, and they helped found a church which was called the Catholic Apostolic Church. You could look this up. I can't quite remember the name of its founder, but it's one of those very strange 1850s revivalist movements. I shall have to research the name and give it to anyone who's interested. But it was nothing to do with the Mother Church that we know. But it was a crazy revivalist cult that had clergy called angels and all sorts. Thankfully, in the generations,
sounds like Tom Cruise sort of territory.
Yeah.
Or it just sounds like you were into something really special and you've given it up.
Well, it went the way of the dodo on the fact that nobody wanted to become the clergy. You know what?
Right.
No one wanted to be called an angel.
So they weren't really angels.
No.
Got to be asked. I mean,
yeah. But it was sort of, in terms of its sacred tradition and scripture, it was somewhere in between High Church Anglicanism and it was close to Anglo-Catholicism, I have to say. And that's where, up until my grandfather, we occupied on the religious scale. So there is some religious history there, absolutely.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about your upbringing. Did you ever come across religion? Were you exposed to religion? I mean, you had an inquisitive mind. So what was growing up in an agnostic household like? Drink 'em while you got 'em.
Absolutely. Let's have a think. So I went to a state nursery, state primary, state educated all the way through, and I was very happy with the education that I received. It was perfectly harmless. I lived for the most of my life in a little village on the outskirts of a town, so there wasn't any pressure to sort of mingle as an urbanite or anything like that. You could really get away from it all and just really relax. And I have to say that it was a good upbringing, but I was never really exposed to any religious ideas until university, when I began to speak with people of so many different in backgrounds. It was absolutely amazing, the people that I met there, and I started to develop an inkling that my tiny village on the outskirts of my town is nowhere near representative of the diversity of ideas out there. And that
I'm
was
just gonna,
what.
I'm just going to
Yes, of course.
wade in there. I'm just wondering. Like
Sure.
during that phase when you were at school before you hit uni,
Yep.
you must have had people in the classroom, between the ages of 7 and 18 who were religious. Even if it's some Muslim wearing a headscarf or something. What was your opinion of those people when you were growing up before you got to that stage at uni?
Do you know what? I will have to take that question, Chris, and say that it's a good assumption, but it's actually rather wayward of my upbringing. I was not exposed to an inkling of religion in
Wow.
my tiny town.
So what was the town like?
It's a diverse place, but people don't really occupy themselves with religious matters. Granted, it's not like I hadn't seen a church or something. I'd had that ultra surface level introduction. I'd been to Christmas services, but I'd never really thought about them any more deeply than the fact that this is the done thing, and I'd never really probed my mind with some answers to spiritual questions. I was a soft left kind of metropolitan kind of individual when I was younger. I had a very good group of friends. We just kept to ourselves mostly, but I gradually got round to the idea that there was more, and I started to play a lot of computer games in my time. Up through the ages of 12 up to I'd say about 17, 18, when I sort of stopped playing because I ran out of time to do so. Time was a luxury when you're younger. But yes, indeed, no, that's as close as I ever got. Some Christmas and Easter services. So I apart from that, totally irreligious upbringing.
So what was it that made you think there was more?
Well, this is it. It's the question comes down to: do I believe in a universe that it was fundamentally chaotic, that humans were, just the product of some lucky evolutionary streak that we hear today? Or is there something more to it that not even science can answer? And I probed the ends of the earth for a scientific answer to this, and they haven't gotten beyond the theory of evolution yet. And then I started to, I picked up some holy books of multiple religions. I didn't actually mention this when we were talking about it before.
We might have to kick him off, Tom.
I'm coming to it. I'm coming to it. It's not the pre-checked out answer, exactly, the pre-approved answer. So I picked up the Hindu holy texts. I think that's for the Hindus, yes, and it was a fascinating read. I mean, it's one of the oldest religions in the world, and it really has some concrete answers to certain aspects. But then again, like many of these other religions, they don't give you a full plan of the universe and its divine creation. And then I started to do some more digging. This was prompted by a very state school interpretation of religious education, so we had a quite pluralistic view of the religions. And then I continued that all throughout university, and then I finally, after a very long, picked up the Bible, and I started to read how the formation of the universe and the earth, and it all suddenly made sense to me. There was something wrong with all those other religious texts that didn't really click for me personally. And the Bible answered all those remaining questions, and I thought this had to be the only correct interpretation of how the universe began. And then I came to the church in a very roundabout way. I spoke to Unitarians, I spoke to evangelicals, I spoke to all sorts of denominations. And when I finally came round to Anglicanism, this is one step before Roman Catholicism when I discovered it, I realized there were some excellent concrete answers that really resounded with my upbringing, the missing elements of my upbringing, if that makes sense. Something that, not that I'd been deliberately kept from, arguably you could say it was, because it was completely expunged from the state education system. But it filled in a whole bunch of gaps that I felt were correct for my upbringing. And then finally, the final point I'll make on this, this brings me up pretty much to today, that I spoke with some traditional Roman Catholic friends. They said, are you a Christian? What kind of faith are you? What kind of denomination do you feel you belong to? And I said I was an Anglican moving towards Anglo-Catholicism. And they simply said, well, why not read about Roman Catholicism? And that's where the journey began. And I have to say I was enraptured ever since. I've done my absolute best to go to Mass every week and try to flourish in an otherwise world that seems to want to expunge religion completely. So that brings me up to today, I think, that last little segment.
Okay, I've got 3 questions. Remind me that I've got 3 questions, because I will definitely forget about them over the course of asking them. Actually, the first one is more a point, and it's when you were talking about deriving certain truths from books like, the Hindu holy books, and people read the Quran and other faith books for other religions, and they draw these truths. And I don't think that is a suitable objection to people saying, well, these other religions have truths, so Catholicism can't be true. Because if there is an objective truth to morality, then it's going to be identifiable. And so long as you've got intelligent people out there looking at the world, taking in truths, well, then it's highly likely that all those people will be able to take in a certain amount of truth. So
just to compliment that, Todd, you've made that as a really positive point. The negative side to that coin is simply that every good lie has an element of truth in it, right?
Yeah.
So there's going to be certain truths in Islam. There's going to be certain truths in Hinduism, and that's obviously what Charlie's identified. But a great point.
That's it. Yeah. Well, I was speaking with
questions.
Yes, of course. You have 2 more questions, Tom.
Second question was going to be, so you've dumped the Quran, you've read the Quran, and you've gone, nah, and you've read the Hindu holy book, and you've thrown that, and then you've picked up the Bible, and maybe you weren't saying it this specifically, but you read Genesis, and what was it literally as you reading, the 7-day version of creation and going, that does it for me? Or like how did that interaction with biblical Christianity unfold?
Yes. The beauty of Genesis is that it's a succinct, beautiful passage on what we have come to call in philosophy as the prime mover. That it's the center of the universe, it's how it all began, and it's beyond the reaches of science, and it gives us a concrete answer of what exactly happened because it was divinely revealed.
So did you read Genesis?
Yes.
In accompanied with other texts as well? Like when you talk about
did, yes.
The unmoved mover and the prime mover, that's not necessarily referred to in Genesis.
So yes, I like to think that I did move from there. What I saw from there I started reading about the prophecies of Jacob and Isaac and Enoch and in the Hebrew Bible, amazing, the stump of Jesse and all sorts. And then naturally, as the Bible is a full text of wisdom, I began reading the Gospels, and I realized that finally on this earth, we had someone who had walked this earth who was the Son of God. Now, I'm still very rudimentary on my Bible study. I'm afraid I don't know it inside out as I should. I mainly read the passages as they come up in the Missal and absorb the message and try to enact it in my daily life. But I haven't read all four of the Gospels, the main ones, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, yet. I need to sit down and do that. But I do understand the full arch of the message, and it's a beautiful completeness to it. The Immaculate Conception, the birth, the life of Jesus, the crucifixion, and the ascension. It's a most wonderful, complete philosophy that I've found to date, and that's how I became a convert. That the idea that the completeness, it felt like slipping on a glove. That something that had been done thousands of years, it felt correct, it felt morally upright, that you can see the traces of it in the modern world, that we see how we perceive the world as a fundamentally Christian way. And I felt like I'd come home in a way, if that makes sense, that I don't want to sound all televangelist, but I want to say that, it felt like a sense of homecoming. And that's the kind of answer you get like on American Baptist television, I know. But but yes, that, as simply as that, it was like reading a map to find your way home.
Okay.
You just sparked a thought, Charlie. Like you've not yet converted to Catholicism, have you? I think you're going through the stages.
That's correct, yes.
If you haven't been baptized yet, are you going to go full immersion, or like how are you going to do it?
Full Methodist baptism. Well, I'm speaking with a priest that I know over from the town over from me. He knows the full old rite of the adult baptism, and I felt like that would be correct for me. So
okay. Well, fingers crossed you can actually tell us about that. But my third question, and I better ask you it now, otherwise I'm going to forget it, and it's the most important question of all three, especially now that you're in the hot seat. How long have you known Chris?
How did I know Chris?
How did you know Chris?
How did I know Chris?
How long, I think that was the question.
Both.
How long?
Both. How did you meet him, and how long have you known him?
Gosh, well, Chris and I must have met through the parish of my hometown. I believe that's correct, isn't it? Because I think we met at Mass. Is that right? Or did we meet through?
We might have met at Mass, but I don't remember it. I think. Yes. I actually think that you are one of the victims of my COVID virtual pubs. That I set up a little network during coronavirus, and I actually sort of had a little bit of a business venture, but it's the worst business venture in the world. I didn't make any money, but I set up a couple of pubs online, and we'd all log in on a forum like this and have our pints, and we'd just have a chat. And Charlie was invited to it by a mutual friend.
Yes.
And we got chatting there. So I'm not even sure if we've ever met in person. Actually,
we haven't.
Which is really weird, if it's true.
Are you serious?
No, we never have. He's right. Yes, he tells the story perfectly.
You two have not met in person. This is so funny. This is terrific. My day has been made. So here I am talking to Chris, and he's like, I've got this old friend who would love to come on. You two haven't even met him. But hang on, who needs?
That's the beauty of it.
Who needs face-to-face interaction when you've got technology?
Absolutely. Well, I won't go that far, but yeah, I know where you're coming from with that. No, I think he's exactly right. I don't think we did meet at Mass. We met through the virtual pub, absolutely, yes. And we got talking about all sorts. And yeah, brilliant chap. I mean, I was intending to go to the Founders Spirit Conference, and I think that's probably where we probably would have met for the first time.
Oh, yeah. So that was a conference that was a conference that was held a couple of weeks ago, hosted by the Society of St. Pius X, and it was bringing together a load of young people to basically just to talk about topical issues. It was sort of like a mini retreat, but without the hard bits. Like, you know, you have a bit of drinks in the evenings, big chat, lots of music, and plenty of really good conferences on various topics. We talked about all sorts. But yeah, so that was the Founder Spirit conference that Charlie's referring to there. But
that would be a very good thing to check out.
I actually currently live, this is weird, in Charlie's hometown, but he's not there. So whenever you come home to see your folks, come and knock on my door.
Absolutely. Well, this is it. Yes, yeah, because I left my hometown to go back to university as Chris moved to it, which is quite a funny thing. And I thought, oh, blast, I've just missed him. And I just thought, yeah. Rats, you know, we were talking about how he was moving in one of the last virtual pubs, and I just thought, yeah, I'm just going to miss him because I'm heading back up to Nottingham to look for work. So,
Tom,
so
great investigative journalism there. Like, we weren't expecting that question.
Chris, well, there we are. That was the takeaway there. moves into people's old homes. Terrific. So Charlie, what sort of stage are you at in your journey towards baptism?
Well, I'm definitely moving towards it at greater speed than I was over COVID time. So COVID did put a delay on it, unfortunately, especially how they were banned outright to begin with. So the priest that I know took measures to make sure he was, you know, kept safe and healthy, and sort of he televised mass weekly and he gave a Latin mass. And I'm torn between, at the moment, being baptised on its own or taking full instruction with the Society for Society of St. Pius X. The thing is that I spoke with Father Robert Brusciani, who is the the district superior.
He's the top dog, the head honcho of the SSPX.
He is, and he's such a fantastic, faithful chap. He really is, and he put it so succinctly that joining the Catholic Church has to be something of intention. You have to be fully ready to commit your soul and your body to the Catholic Church. And I felt I took that away from him, and I said, am I really ready to undergo the journey yet? Have I, metaphorically packed my bag, and am I ready to take the journey yet? And I feel that I'm getting to the stages where I might be. And contrary to what Father Brusciani told me, I felt like that baptism in the old rite first would set me down the road properly to take full instruction from the more traditional arm of the Catholic Church, and to be confirmed, hopefully, around March, April next year, depending on how things go. So, yes, that's it in a nutshell. I am still pre-baptism at the moment. Thankfully, I was not baptized as an infant, and I don't have to. I can leave behind my past life and hopefully undertake a full and frank and faithful journey. And fingers crossed that
Beautiful, yes, Charlie. I'm welling up. Do you think
that's that really nice wine that you're drinking, isn't it?
That's it.
Yeah, no, definitely is. So if you were to look back on old Charlie 5-6 years ago, and Charlie since you've been undergoing this investigation and this instruction in all things Catholic,
yes,
do you think you can actually identify an impact that Catholicism has had on your life? Because this is the big thing. You talk to lots of young people who are either Catholic and decide to fall away because they just did not see the point in living a Catholic life, or you talk to people out in the world. Am I coming through okay? I'm hearing some funny stuff.
Yeah, no, you're fine.
Good. Sorry, I just interrupted my flight. Horrible. You talk to these young people who see religion as just a nothing. Why would I abandon the fun and the pleasure that I'm experiencing now if that is in fact what they're experiencing for some austere life? Whereas it seems that your you've made that commitment to a degree. You're working along in the direction of, hopefully becoming baptized. Do you think there is a benefit to Catholicism?
Well, it's a grand question. Where did the benefits?
It's about 10 questions.
I do that. I'm so sorry. I wax lyrical and then throw this question. And maybe that's why. Chris, thank you so much for saying that. A lot of the time when I ask questions, the interviewees are staring back at me going, what? What? And I'm going, huh?
I think it was a cracking question. Like,
Excellent.
I'm on the edge of my seat waiting to hear what Charlie says.
Trying to give some context.
So, where do the advantages of Catholicism specifically lie? Now, that is a beautiful, beautiful question.
Or do you feel like it has actually enriched your life?
Oh, that's excellent. Taking it from the personal perspective. I will say this fully and frankly, that I crave the order and the personal outlet that it has given my life. The regular attendance of Mass, the option to attend daily Mass in times of spiritual strife, the ability eventually to take the sacraments and the holy body and blood, and to feel that you're in full safe hands is probably one of the most attractive things about traditional Catholicism itself. Tom, I know, is a lawyer, and he'll like this reference, the fact that we have, we know our contracts quite well. And Catholicism feels exactly like a contract. It feels like that you are accepting an offer to work towards something great in your life, and
for
in
which
a way
you will receive consideration.
Exactly.
Or hereafter.
That's it. You in a sense, you give consideration, which is something back to the Lord, back to God, and that's by living a life of grace. And I feel like the beauty of the sacred scripture and the sacred tradition, it brings out this thought process of higher engagement, that you are engaging with something that is by no means worldly. You are definitely engaging something of the spirits. The beauty of the refinement of the centuries has meant that it is something that is, I remember the first time I attended Latin Mass, I described it as otherworldly because I didn't have the vocabulary yet to express the beauty of the Tridentine Mass. And that for me is where the advantages of Roman Rite Catholicism for me lies. It's the beauty of the Mother Church, its tradition, its mark that he has left upon the world and continues to leave upon the world. And it's like going back to my journey. It's like that sense of homecoming. It's the Church of St. Peter. It's what our Lord left behind, and it is still what our Lord left behind on the earth. And I feel that it is the place of salvation and refuge, and it brings order to your life if you fully engage with it and immerse with it. And now going back to the idea that people who want to give up the temporary pleasures of life, can they do it? It's a leap of faith. I'm not going to pull the punches and say that it's hard, because I did it myself, and I said that. But it took me one question, and that was, do I want to live this way for the rest of my life? And from then on, I think that was the question that sealed it for me. And I returned a negative answer, and I began looking for truth, and I found it pretty much in the Catholic Church, certainly the traditional arm of it.
Charlie,
Yes.
One of the things that comes through in Catholic spirituality is that sort of, the lures and attractions of the world ultimately are a type of slavery if you immerse yourself in them and give into them. So and we all do this battle, right? Because it's not like we're some sort of puritanical religion. So we're all allowed to have a glass of really nice white wine, and to engage in other things. But we all kind of sometimes stray over the line, and then there's this constant battle between, for each and every individual to try and free themselves of that slavery and rush towards Christ. Did it feel, I'm just trying to put myself in your shoes as a cradle Catholic, was that decision, am I framing it correctly? Was it sort of giving up? Did it feel like you were escaping a form of slavery and moving towards a form of freedom, albeit freedom through discipline?
It's a beautiful metaphor, but it's a very barbaric topic. It's a beautiful metaphor because you've just hit the heads on the two kinds of worlds that we can occupy, the world of material and the world of the spirit. And I think you perfectly summed up the battle.
We've lost him.
We've lost
slavery
Charlie.
of the world.
Charlie,
no.
we lost you. Back.
Hello. Can you hear me all right? Can you hear me
now?
He was just confirming my bias. I need to hear it.
Oh, yes. I did actually have a pause there, if you were wondering. So you can hopefully still hear me because I'm excellent. So yes, it's an excellent question, and you're exactly right, Chris. I felt like I was escaping something. So I will say this, that when I crossed that divide, I said, is this the type of life that I could live for the rest of my life? And when I returned a negative answer, it was like crossing a divide into the world of the spirit, and it was the most beautiful thing, I have to say. And it opens up an entirely new plane of existence. I'm speaking in a very woolly way, but yes, you're exactly right. It felt that taking the leap of faith exactly feels like escaping something and returning home to something that has always existed. So
beautiful.
Hopefully
do you attend a Latin Mass?
Whenever I can, I do. Yes. Okay. I haven't been to a Novus Ordo Mass in about a year, I have to say.
And what underpins that? So there's still a lot of converts who I assume convert from agnosticism or atheism to Catholicism, but attend the Novus Ordo. And some of my biggest academic heroes, for none of the better phrase or term, did not make that complete jump when they converted from Marxism or something to Catholicism, to tradition. And so when somebody does, you go, why? Why tradition?
It's a beautiful question again.
We're full of beautiful questions, aren't we, Chris?
Full of beautiful questions, Tom. Just like that beautiful top that you're wearing there with your beautiful tie.
I'm just really excited for Christmas. It couldn't come sooner.
You know what? Anyone viewing who's viewed up within almost an hour now, like, it's the elephant in the room. What is Tom wearing?
Exactly. We'll have to come back to that at the end and say.
I'm seriously. Yeah. Okay. Let's not hijack it.
Yes.
Dearie me.
That's okay. So why tradition? A good two-word question. Tradition for me was an opportunity to immerse myself in something that I had no prior exposure to. That was probably the strongest argument for the traditional Latin Mass. Imagine, if you will, that the Novus Ordo Mass is a gatekeeper to a beautiful, tradition-rich church, that many of the changes, which you'll probably know about through Tom's other podcasts, meant that the church fundamentally changed in the 1960s. It abandoned its, up to that point, 1,800 years of tradition. At least 1,800 years, I should say. And when I learned about the Latin Mass from, again, the traditional Catholic friends who converted me, who evangelized to me, I felt that it was the most appropriate frame for the gospel of Christ and the messages that he left behind on this world. It's when you study the ordinary of the Mass and you study the prayers that you have on it each constituent Sunday, you realize that it's a complete year-long journey every single time that the Gospels that you are told, the extracts from the Gospels have been curated specifically for the Mass of the Sunday or whichever day that you're attending, a feast day perhaps, and you're opening this entire treasure chest of wondrous tradition. And that's why the Latin Mass is so beautiful, because it enriches you in a world of tradition. It also enriches you in the importance of silence. I remember Cardinal Serra talked about this reasonably recently. He said that we have to rediscover silence in our churches. And that's what I noticed most starkly about the traditional mass, Latin Mass. It was a room full, oftentimes, of large families and very traditional folk who are there in dead silence. And it's the most contemplative environment that I have found in an otherwise very noisy world. I think it's so enriching. And you find that tradition in that sense, this has been something that has been refined over the centuries, and you won't find anything better for answering a better frame of mind for answering the deeper questions, I have to say. So that's my opening speech for why tradition. So
that's beautiful. And I mean, I guess there's two things you could take away from that. There's the literal silence in church, which I have spent in this Brisbane city. I mean, I know it's not known for its beautiful churches, but there are a couple of fairly nice churches there. There's St. Stephen's, and you just notice, though, there is it's a complete lack of reverence for what we claim to be going on in there. The way a lot of people conduct themselves, even not during formal ceremonies, as compared to more traditional churches, that the reverence that people have on entering the church, it's where, we're leaving the world behind and entering into the transcendent. And there's this awareness of what one is doing in church. So I guess there's that form of the literal silence that can sort of be distinguishing the two sorts of, the modernist perspective as opposed to the traditional perspective. But then there's this broader silence, and just if you were to turn the noise that exists in the world outside, the activity, the movement, life's struggles, whether it's work, whether it's play, anything, you'd equivocate noise with distraction, and then just having the ability to go, whoa, silence, and actually hear your thoughts. And I just wonder, it's so difficult to do that, almost through no fault of your own, but acquiring the ability and then the discipline to have moments of silence. You'd almost think it's absolutely necessary to be able to connect with the deeper truths of life.
Just to complete that, Tom, as I think, well, you both know, I spent a bit of time at the seminary, so priest training school, and it's one of the key elements that they hammer home into you. And there's no class on like how to be silent, but it's hammered home in everything that you do. There's silence throughout the day. And this was a very traditional seminary, but it's interesting that Charlie chose that to focus on. Like, there's all sorts of differences between the Mass in English, the modern Mass, and the traditional Mass, but picking silence as the one, as the key kind of takeaway to describe like why one rather than the other. It's interesting that it's one of the things that they hammer home into the elite, if you like, into the priests. And the message, why do you do that? It's because God speaks in silence. God doesn't speak through your busy like television sets, or you're driving down the highway or whatever it might be. Motorway. Exactly. Sorry, that was an Americanism. But God speaks in silence, and so God, if you're focused on what's happening in the church at Mass, even if it's a sung mass where there's lots of spiritual noise, right? But interiorly, you have to be at peace and silent, and then you will slowly start to hear that voice of conscience, that voice of the Holy Ghost.
That's it. Yes, if I can follow on directly, I can say that God is always speaking, but it's whether humans are listening. That's the main issue. For me, that's what the silence brought out. It allowed me to listen for once in my life, and I had to say that there's increasing pressure in the modern world to be distracted from cradle to grave. And that's a perfect environment if you want to, not getting too conspiratorial, if humans are perpetually distracted, then they're far more easily controlled. That's a topic for another time, perhaps.
Next week.
Tune in next time.
More of this. More of this.
More of that. Yeah. It's exactly right, though. To hear the Holy Ghost, you have to listen. And silence is the greatest accompaniment to consciousness that there is. It engages you to grapple with the hardest questions of our existence. And I think if I had never discovered it, I never would have asked these questions in such a deep and wide-ranging manner. So it's a good reason to go to the traditional Latin Mass. And you'll also, as some more subsidiary reasons, you can say that you'll be surrounded by people who are faithful Catholics, which is a very important thing for growing your faith.
Okay.
Sharing faith experiences like this in a way, and seeing if you have a place within the Catholic Church. I think it's the best seller of the Catholic Church that there actually
We need to capture that, Tom, and put it on a poster. Like, Charlie, do you have a place in the Catholic Church?
Here's a place for you. And we'll have to, take Uncle Sam and do something
That's
funny
right,
with
put
him.
a hat on you, Charlie, and some stars and stripes. Actually, just get one of Tom's tops.
I bet he has an Australian flag one as well somewhere.
Dear me, that's a tank top. That's a bit different. This is the winter equivalent. It's actually, we're going into summer here, so it's been raining, so it's a cooler evening. So this, is not as ridiculous as it would seem if you actually thought about it. My last curly or potentially curly question for you, Charlie, and be careful how you answer this, because this is the make or break. Charlie's about to lose a lot of friends over this one. Why the Society of St. Pius X?
Well, this is it. This is the question that divides, I don't want to say divides Catholics, but it sets them apart in quite increasingly rigid groups.
It's flammable.
Yes, indeed. It's an intense question. Now, when I was attending Latin Masses, I was attending them on an increasingly traditional spectrum, if that makes sense. So I started with a lovely local one that has a perfect celebration of the Tridentine Rite, but it's very simple in its fashion. And that can be fantastic for your faith, equally as the grandest high mass at the oratories. But then I attended a mass with the Fraternal Society of St. Peter, I think they're called, aren't they, Chris? Is that right?
Mostly right, yeah.
Yes.
Fraternity, but yeah, it doesn't matter.
That's it. And they had a fantastic middle way, if that makes sense. They weren't too radical, but they celebrated the traditional rite in its glory, and they knew all the proper orientation. But the thing that really convinced me for the SSPX when I first went to their masses, I'm hearkening back to something that I read, and don't associate this with the exceptionally radical Catholic magazine of the same name. But whilst we're on the earth, we're meant to be the church militants, if that makes sense to people in the room. We're meant to be not necessarily aggressively, but positively spreading, assertively preaching the values of the gospel and the life of a traditional Catholic. And from what I saw from the SSPX, I saw this most wonderful, outward-looking, evangelistic organization that was really serious about growing and attracting people to its churches. It does this by building churches from scratch in America, which many of American listeners may have heard of. Beautiful church. It's being built entirely out of society funds. It's well on its way. Purchasing old churches, making use of chapels that have long since gone by the wayside. It's my genuine experience of a revival of epic proportions, and I think if it continues to grow as it is in vocations and congregations, which I pray for every day because it's the most beautiful outward-looking fraternal society that I've stumbled across, it will enrich your life with people who are the most traditional Catholics that you'll meet. Whether that's an attractive thing for you, you have to find out, I think. They can be quite... Well, they're a lovely bunch, but they are sometimes very protective of their tradition. And they can be quite denouncing of other people's personal experiences sometimes, because they're very serious about the faith and they feel that it should be adopted inwardly as well as outwardly. So for me, in a nutshell, the SSPX is the most active fraternal society that there is within the broad Catholic Church that I've discovered, and I think it's a proper sense of home for me personally. I think the congregation there are brilliant. I think the masses are wonderful, and it's the best of what I've discovered so far. So there we are.
Just to compliment what Charlie said there, Tom, I think that the reason that it is like that, or the way that Charlie summed it up, is because of the differences between the SSPX and certain other organisations. So, just as a final anecdote, during COVID and coronavirus here in the UK, the bishops of England and Wales decided, way ahead of any government mandate, to close all the churches and to stop distributing the sacraments, essentially. And the SSPX was pretty much the only organisation that said, "Nah, we're not obliged. There's no policeman forcing us to close the churches. We're carrying on." And there was a couple of weeks, if I can't remember the exact time frame, where it was pretty much the only place you could get mass, and consequently, the churches were filled. If
I could jump on the back of this, yes, absolutely. Remember it well. I remember the Sunday before lockdown, Laetare Sunday, third week in March, I believe. This was the last mass that was offered in what we're increasingly becoming to call the old world, and the church was absolutely packed. I've never seen Holy Cross in Woking so packed before.
Don't name it.
Well, we can edit that out.
Just to finish the point, I think that we haven't gone at all into any of the arguments as to why the SSPX versus the FSSP versus the Institute versus the Oratory, but I think their position, because of the position they've taken, has allowed them, and you've got priests who know to put the supernatural first rather than some sort of bodily mild version of a cold that might finish 0.1% of you off. No, we keep the churches open because this is what's important. Now, of course, an FSSP priest would say the same, but he can't necessarily do it if his local bishop tells him to shut down the church. So yeah. So what Charlie said in a very beautiful kind of very Charlie way, I think, is based on some very concrete differences. I think it's important to mention that.
Yeah, I will just say this, very briefly, Top, before it's a beautiful discussion. I could
hijack the podcast, Tom.
Cutting off the host, I am sorry. The final point I'll say, just to add on to Chris and go back and forth on this one, is that the SSPX for me was the only fraternal society that realised the importance of spiritual nourishment being as important as physical nourishment. That continuing through with televised masses all throughout lockdown was exceptionally important for me personally, to have that experience, perhaps at a distance, but still as enriching as, perhaps not being as enriching as being there, but, still immensely nourishing for the soul. And he's quite right that the SSPX opened their doors when all the others closed theirs. And that shows true spiritual commitment and resilience in a world that seems to be increasingly shy of doing so. So That's my
just in case this is being watched. They've always stayed on the right side of the law, of course.
Yes,
you guys
that's
know
right.
is important as lawyers,
Yeah.
but they've put the supernatural first.
Yeah, and I think
you, Tom, you've not
I think
worked for the last 5 minutes.
no, it's good for me. That's a very rare occurrence. So thank you. Yeah, silence, contemplative, introspective, and I'm soaking in the words that you are saying, and I'm understanding them. No, I think that the story you've just described from England is a very common story, at least in the areas where the Society of St. Pius X has been operating all over the world, which is it's real credit to them. But it really speaks to something that is so fundamental. And I think you both picked this up, albeit in different ways, in your recent soliloquies. It was that, if this is real, then it must be done. So what you said before, a lot of churches closed down before they were actually mandated to close down by the government. And the Society of St. Pius X, they went straight to televised masses. But in Brisbane, and I'm assuming it was similar over there, the minute they could reopen, they reopened. And they conformed to, they dotted, and that they have really, I have seen this on the ground over here, dotting I's and crossing T's in terms of conforming with government mandates. But there's this appreciation of, that the sacraments are real and the sacraments are necessary for your salvation. So our number one priority is to get people the sacraments. You drive down Milton Road or something and you look up at the church that sits there and, closed to COVID, see you next time, not necessarily in those words, but you go, gee, it just really takes religion and places it as, some fantastical luxury that certain people indulge in to make them feel better about themselves, which is what a lot of people take religion to be. Whereas, no, it's a science. It is as real as we are having this conversation, and accordingly, the sacraments, communion, confession, the mass, catechism, all these things must go on. And if they don't, there is a real problem.
I think a story that is heartrending, and it's like you say, I'm sure it's the same the world over. That I think I got this from a priest recently, an SSPX priest. You've got these people in hospitals, the ones that are actually suffering, and the small number that were actually affected, and on their deathbeds, whether it be from COVID or from anything else, and they want a priest for the last rites, they want a priest for the sacraments, and if, as we believe, that it's fundamental that they get access to the sacraments, almost like more important than food, right? If you're on your deathbed, you don't care, you want a priest, and they couldn't. You ring the diocese, you ring the hospital chaplain, they're not coming in, they can't come in, they don't want to come in. It's too difficult to organise it with the hospital, and I've heard time and again of, certainly here, society priests, beating the warpath to the bedside of someone that's dying to administer the sacraments because the hospital chaplain who was first called wouldn't do it. So that for me just sums it up. Yeah. It's like, well, of course, that's not an argument for why the SSPX over a fraternity St. Peter, because they would do the same.
Yeah. But, if you've seen the movie The Castle and you're familiar with the character Dennis Denudo, it's the vibe. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but those of you that have seen The Castle will appreciate that. But a positive story coming out of Melbourne, because we were talking about that recently, there was an article in The Australian maybe a week or two ago, and effectively there's an increasing number of even diocesan Catholic priests down in Melbourne who are more or less disobeying COVID lockdown restrictions to give the last rites and administer to the sick and the dying. And while you don't advocate disregard for the law, there is a time where you must prioritise, and you go, okay, you've hit a junction and you must make a choice. somebody's eternal salvation must trump a law that is denying you the sanctifying grace or whatever else.
You guys will know this better than I, but it's an iniquitous law from a Catholic perspective. It's no law at all.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, Aquinas would say that probably more eloquently than anybody else. But it was very refreshing to see. I think it was Monsignor Portelli who played a very big role in, not sure if you followed it, Cardinal Pell's trial down in Melbourne. That debacle. But his name popped up and I thought, there he is again. So it is very, very nice and refreshing to see priests taking their duties that seriously, and it does give us reason to hope. But such is the world we live in, gents.
Quite so.
Yeah. Okay. Well, here you go for both of you, and I'll shoot this one at Chris as well as Charlie. Closing comments to young, malleable people, young, malleable, inquisitive people who are looking at religion, looking at Catholicism, and who are coming from all different sorts of backgrounds. That could be, a-religious, militant atheistic, diluted with different forms of religion and culture. What advice would you give them to guide them along the path to discovering a truth? We'll start with Charlie.
Yes. Hearkening back to my lengthy summing up of my journey, ask yourself the question that I did. Are you happy with the life that you're living now? Does it answer all of your questions? Does it give you enough satisfaction beyond merely, distractions? Do you feel, if all those distractions were taken away, would you feel still contented? And could you find that contentment from within? And that's the questions that I asked myself.
So what if the band stopped playing?
Exactly right. If there was the silence that we have emphasized in this journey together, you'll find that that's it. In pure silence, would you be content? That's it. Could you find a way of being content? And that will start you off on a journey that might be similar to mine. It might be entirely unique to yourself, but you'll find truth through that, I think. Truth through contemplation and silence, I think.
That's beautiful, Charlie. All right, your turn, Chris. Sitting smug over in the corner.
How do I follow that? You have a place in the church. I would say pray. I mean, you had Father Paul Robinson on recently, and that was his main thing. Carve out some time during your day and connect with God, and start with 5 minutes. And don't just sit there and cogitate. Actually, base it on some. Read a short excerpt from the Bible, from the Gospels, whatever it might be. And think about that passage. Make it once you're happy doing 5 minutes, move on to 10, maybe 15 if you can, and do it daily. And God will speak to you. You give him an inch, he will take a mile, and he will drag you kicking and screaming in the right direction. Read The Hound of Heaven, which is a poem by Francis Thompson. That's definitely a good one. I'm not going to go on at length about it. And then finally, there's loads of resources available online. Contact Tom, not me. A great channel to look at is Dr. Taylor Marshall. He's had this journeys from evangelical Protestantism all the way across to I guess traditional Catholicism. I think he goes to the FSSP. He's got all sorts of videos and also resources available. So there's a number of different things you can do. I mean, anyone still watching this video an hour and a half in or whatever it is obviously inquisitive and interested. And if you're not a Catholic yet, I'm sure you soon will be.
And I'm just going to say, Charlie, we'll have to prepare the contract so that we can get all the royalties from Taylor Marshall for all the views he receives from Chris's plug.
Oh, no. Yeah, he sold us out.
That's right. It's competition, isn't it? There was another website that I shared with you guys recently this week, and I had a chat with the guy that runs it yesterday, Our Warpath, which is a really interesting one coming out of America. And it's not specific to any parish or community or FSSP, SSPX, whatever. It's a bunch of traditional Catholics, and they have daily meditations. They've got various things you can read. I think they've got elements on like music and video. So it's a kind of a one-stop shop for resources. So I would definitely point people in their direction as well.
Beautiful. Gentlemen, this has been an absolute hoot. I'm not sure what language that word comes from, but I think we all get the vibe.
It's been straight out of Aquinas.
And it's a stonking good podcast.
I was going to say something there, but I chose not to, and I think everybody's going to be better because of it. I can't wait till we get to do this all again. Thank you so much for joining me. God bless. Have wonderful weeks, and I will see you all next time.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.